Hey everyone, this is Mr. Ward with a brief overview of hosting meetings on Zoom, including some tips to make sure you're doing it safely and efficiently and getting the most out of your meeting time. This overview is assuming you've downloaded the Zoom client. When you go to the Zoom website and try to join a meeting for the first time, it'll prompt you to download it anyway. The Zoom client has more features than the web-based version, so you should go ahead and download that if you haven't already. There are two types of meetings you can start: instant meetings and meetings using your personal meeting ID. By clicking on the New Meeting button, by default you'll start a random instant meeting. What that means is when you go to the meeting information, the meeting ID and the password are randomized. Your personal meeting ID, however, is a number that's unique to you that stays the same. What your personal meeting ID is really for is for groups or teams that you meet with regularly. So instead of having to send out a new meeting ID and password each time, you can send out your personal meeting ID, which they can save, and then they can join it anytime in the future. You have the option with the free plan to customize the password. You cannot change your meeting ID, however, unless you have the pro or more. I would recommend changing that password every couple weeks or so just to ensure that your meeting is safe and secure and reduce the chance of people potentially hacking your password or getting into your meetings that you don't want. Within your meeting, once you're ready to invite, you have the option to inviting your Zoom contacts, which can be updated from the Zoom client, and you can even organize your contacts into channels, which makes it easier to start meetings with specific groups. You can also send out an email invitation to any account that you've connected to the Zoom client through your settings. Down here at the bottom, you have the option to copy a link or copy a full invitation, which just saves the link to the meetings. That way you can email that out or copy and paste it somewhere where people can see it and click on it. And you can use that kind of wherever you need. Scheduling meetings can be done in a couple of ways. By default, when you schedule a meeting, you have the option to choose the date and time, as well as choosing whether the meeting that is created uses a random ID or the personal meeting ID like we discussed before. You can customize the password, or you can decide to set up a recurring meeting. The way recurring meeting works is instead of specifying the time here, it'll export it to your calendar, whether that's Google Calendar, Outlook, or something similar, and you can create a recurring event and then just invite whatever participants you need to that event. And the event will include the meeting ID and information so they can join it easily from there. If you don't want to export the meeting to a calendar, you can choose other calendars, which will create a little invite that you can copy and paste into an email or post it onto a page somewhere to invite participants that way. That way you can use it in whatever program or app you need instead of using a calendar. And then whatever meetings you schedule will show up on your Zoom homepage, and you can just click start to get the meeting started. Within your Zoom meeting, some features you want to use. You want to always use the waiting room. That way, when people try to join, it'll give you a notification. You have to actually let them in. That allows you to control who's actually getting into the meeting and potentially stop strangers from entering. Also, under security, you have the option to lock the meeting. So say you have a set group of people that you're expecting or a certain class size you're expecting and everybody's present, you can go ahead and lock the meeting, and then nobody else can join or even try to join. And that helps you also control people entering and stops people from potentially hacking in if they happen to work out the ID or password. Under your participants list, in addition to being able to mute everybody and unmute everybody, you have the option to make it the default setting for participants to be muted when they enter the meeting. That can help you control sound when people are first entering the meeting, especially if it's a large meeting and you don't want to deal with background noises. You also have the ability to decide whether participants can unmute themselves. So say if you need to speak and you want to be able to control who's talking one time, you can make it so they cannot unmute themselves. And when you mute everybody, the participants have the option to raise their hand, which will give you a notification that they need to speak. That way you can unmute them if they can't do it themselves. The Zoom group chat is useful for keeping people from talking during the meeting. So say if somebody needs to message somebody or message the whole group without interrupting whoever's speaking, they can type it into the group chat, but that can also be controlled. So say if you want to disable it entirely, that way it's not a distraction in your meeting if they can't handle that, or you can decide that they can only communicate with you or with people publicly. So no private messaging means two participants can't be having their own private conversation and being distracted during the meeting. Screen sharing is useful for sharing a document or a slideshow or some other file with your meeting that you want to collaborate on or discuss with your class. There are some settings you just want to be aware of. You can make it so that multiple people can share at one time. You can make it so only you can share, or you can allow other participants to share. So if you say if you want a person or a student in the meeting to share something from their screen, you'll have to enable that setting. You also have the option under sharing screen to create a whiteboard, which is a blank space for you to work on. So say if you want to write or type out some words for the class to follow along with or some notes, then you can do that here. If you're afraid of your participants or your students from being distracted by the whiteboard and drawing on it, you can actually disable their ability to do so by changing annotation settings in your account settings. Say your house is not ready, the room behind you is not clean, and you want to hide that from the meeting. Under your video settings, you can go to choose virtual background, which enables you to choose a picture to cover up what's happening behind you or a video. And you can actually upload your own to customize that a little bit more. So that's useful for if you just want to hide what's going on behind you. The next few settings can only be changed from the web browser, which you can get to from your Zoom client by going to settings and then clicking view more settings. You can also get there from your web browser, whether that's Google Chrome, Firefox, or something else, and going to Zoom, logging in, clicking on your profile picture, and then clicking on your name, and that'll bring up your account settings. In your account settings, you can enable all the features we've talked about before, but there's also some features in here that I want to highlight. This feature right here, embedding password and invite link, can be used to simplify sending out your invitations. And what that means is when you send out an invitation, whether that's through an email or through a calendar event, all users have to do is click the link and they don't have to type in the password because the password is embedded in the link. So that can simplify joining a meeting, especially if you're dealing with some young students. You have the option to change it so that when you click the new meeting button, by default, it chooses the personal meeting ID instead of a random ID if you decide to do that. Remember that your personal meeting ID should be used with regular groups that you meet with, and you should use random instant meetings for groups that you're not going to regularly meet with, just to keep the meetings more secure and protect your personal meeting ID. You can choose to have a sound notification when someone joins or leaves. That way, if you just want a warning when somebody enters, or say if you want a warning if somebody leaves the meeting and you want to just be aware that they did, you can choose to have a notification for that. Annotation enables participants to add notes to shared screens, whether that's the desktop or the whiteboard we talked about earlier. So disabling this will prevent them from being able to add to the whiteboard or to any other shared screens. Breakout room will give you the ability to split your meetings into groups to allow smaller groups to collaborate with each other and then come back together, which could be useful, especially in teaching situations. Once you've enabled breakout rooms in your meeting, it'll show up under your options down here at the bottom. And then once you click on it, you can either do it automatically. So say if you have 10 participants here, you can choose how many rooms to break them into, or you can decide to do it manually, which will take you a minute or two if you didn't schedule it that way. And then once you do it, you have the options here to allow participants to join back to the main session. Say if for some reason you had the full meeting going on while people are in breakout rooms, or you can decide that they close after a certain amount of time. So say if you want a time limit for them to discuss and come back to the main group. So this could be useful, like I said, for group projects or any teaching scenarios. Also, to be clear, I want to specify that you as the host have the ability to monitor the breakout rooms, so they're not just going off privately and having their discussions. You can actually check in on each breakout room. By choosing to allow hosts to assign participants, then when you schedule the meeting, you have the option to choose which participants will be split into which breakout groups, which requires you to have them in your contacts list, but once you do, you can spread them into your own custom breakout rooms. And then finally, in our advanced settings, you have the option when scheduling a meeting to allow users to join from your browser. And what that means is that they don't need the Zoom client to participate. The downside is that the Zoom client has many features that the Zoom browser does not. So it's a little bit of a streamlined performance, but it could be useful if you have a participant who for some reason is not able to download the Zoom client. That was a brief overview to Zoom, so hopefully that leaves you feeling prepared to host your own meetings and use it to the best of your ability.